Okay, so we are moving on from taxes to actually how the economy works in the United States. So we're going to be talking about a couple of different things here today. A lot of vocabulary, which you should already have down. And really and we're going to expand upon it in a minute. Most everything I think you should understand. The one phrase here, though, is means of production. That's the one that I want to make sure that you understand. And that's a fancy way of saying profit. So when we talk about it later on, we're going to talk about who controls means of production in the United States economy or in a capitalist economy. But that's a key thing to remember. Means of production is the profits that you make from your work, from your production. All right, same as always, you have 2 minutes to start writing these down. You can continue writing if you need more time as I begin explaining. All right, we were down at the end, so I'm just going to go ahead, even with the technical error here, and go ahead and get started. All right, so when we are talking about in terms of the United States, we have two main economic systems at play, a market economy and a free economy. Market economy means that individuals and business can compete. That competition means pricing. So even in today's economy is that if you are able to provide a service or a product at a lower price than other people who provide the same exact product or service, you most likely will do better. So you're competing for buyers. You're competing for people to buy your product if you are the seller. Buyers compete with each other because you're looking for the best deal that you can get on a product or a service. So you have some people who will go as cheap as possible. You have others who don't mind paying a higher price if they get a greater quality of product or service. So again, like we said, businesses compete for lower prices, and that competition can also drive other businesses out of markets. So where you might have, whether that's in a nationwide market or even in a local market, so you might have somebody who takes over all of retail, like you have in a lot of local markets where Walmart comes in and they drive local businesses or other smaller stores out of business because they can provide so much more for convenience and for pricing. Workers also compete in a market economy. They compete for wages. So sometimes that might be that you need to have multiple degrees in order to compete at a high level for a very high wage. You also have workers that compete for a low wage. You will have, in order to make sure that they can work, some industries, some skilled workers will work for a lower price to ensure that they are consistently working versus going through periods of unemployment and employment. The free market is sort of an offshoot of this, but is separate. So it allows the opportunity to buy goods that you want versus what someone believes what you need. So the reason you're able to buy all the different types of products that you can is because we have a free market system here in the United States. So there's not just one shoe that you can buy. You have hundreds of thousands of different styles of shoes that you can buy at various different prices. And this is what allows a seller to provide multiple options. So you're not restricted to one brand or one item. And that extends into literally every realm of business that we have in the United States, is that no one just offers, controls one industry and just offers one product or one service. And then this is going to continue on to the next page with economic operations. So these systems operate off of these ideas that we have here. So you defined scarcity before, but the reality of what scarcity is creates our need for pricing. So because we do not have infinite resources, nothing on planet Earth is infinite. If we use it up, it eventually will all be gone. So this is what creates pricing. If it was infinite, there would be no reason to charge anybody other than for labor, and almost everything would nearly be free. So that's the important part about scarcity, is that we have a finite amount of resources on planet Earth. Now, whether we run through it in your lifetime or in another eon, that's debatable. But that's what scarcity creates within our economic system. And then supply and demand, you have your definitions for that, but the basic understanding here is that if demand is high, prices are high. If demand is low, prices go down. So, for example, this can go both ways, but supply and demand gives power to both buyers and sellers, specifically buyers. So, for example, is you take electronics today, and I know we always reference an iPhone when we get to this section, but that's the easiest thing to do. So with iPhones, they're able to charge an exorbitant amount because it's always in high demand, because it is a status symbol, it is brand new technology. So they come out with a new one every year and they charge an ungodly amount of money for it because they know people are going to pay money for it because it's in demand. Now, if all of a sudden everybody around the world was like, that costs way too much, there's no way that we can afford that anymore, and people stop buying iPhones, well then iPhones will no longer be in demand. And then eventually Apple will have to drop the price in order to create demand again. So that's the other way that buyers can control a market using supply and demand, is that if they provide a quality product at a low price, that'll generate demand. And then the more popular it gets, the more they can raise the price. So same goes for something like Air Jordans. When Air Jordans first came out, they were moderately priced shoes, where you could get a pair for the same amount as you would any other athletic shoe at a shoe store. Now it's an astronomical amount of money just to get one pair of Air Jordans compared to what they used to be. All right, 2 minutes, get this down, there's not much left, and we'll wrap up. All right, continuing with economic operations, what we have is, in the United States, we have a free enterprise system, which means that we we expect as little government interference as possible with our businesses. All right, so government interference, that means regulation, taxes, in an extreme case, breaking up monopolies, where you have one company controlling an entire industry. So in this case, what most of the time is most businesses are willing to accept some regulations, some taxes in order to operate. But in a pure free enterprise system, you would have the government stays away from everything. We also refer to this as laissez-faire. When we've talked about this in history classes in the past, that's the fancier term for it. But it just means that government should not interfere with businesses. And we'll talk about examples of regulations when we get to what the U.S. has. U.S. also has a capitalism or a capitalistic economy, which means that the markets are driven by private ownership. So we don't have in mass, meaning like 100% publicly owned companies in the United States, where the government owns those companies and runs them. In the United States, most of our companies are run by private individuals, which means that they can keep as much of those profits as they can, or as they wish. So the way that this breaks down is that the private individual that runs a company or runs a business is the person who can control 100% of the profit. So that's what we mean by means of production, is that whatever that business produces, then in a capitalistic economy, you have that individual has 100% control. So how much they want to put towards bettering their product is up to them. How much they want to pay the people working underneath them is up to them. Obviously, you want to pay workers something because otherwise nobody would work for you. Obviously, you want to put out a good product because otherwise nobody would buy that, or a good service. So that's the idea behind capitalism, is that, and it's what Adam Smith referred to as the invisible hand, and that's what's going to make sure that these private businesses end up doing the right thing, not only for their own sake, but also for the sake of others, whether it's customers or workers. Now, quick aside, because you're going to go through a list of problems that people are seeing with capitalism over the last several decades, is that if that private owner wants to maximize their profits and keep as much of that money as possible, they're going to find ways of cutting those costs. And if they get big enough, or they partner with other businesses and create companies and corporations, they can have a lot more control over that. And they can then at that point would have enough money where they can influence government or even entire markets, so that their product is the only product, or their service is the only service that people are going to come to. But that's a longer story for another time. Finally, in the United States, we have a mixed economy. So based off of these operations, we have businesses are allowed to operate freely and independently, except for when they are considered like a public necessity. That's when the government really steps in and they will either take over that said industry, or they will heavily regulate that industry. So, for example, to use something that everybody participates in almost every single day, the meat industry in the United States. So, not just people raising livestock out on farms in the Midwest and all over the country, but the processing plants where they are slaughtered and made into the different types of meat that you get at the store, or that you order from fast food restaurants, right? So Before, that was completely wide open. We're talking about like back in the late 1800s, completely wide open, no regulation whatsoever. So those businesses, those ranchers, those processing plants could just do whatever they wanted. And all of a sudden, people started getting sick because they're eating spoiled meat or meat that's tainted with other diseases or other bacteria. So the government had to step in and heavily regulate the meat industry in the United States to make sure that it was healthy for Americans to eat. It was considered a necessity. Now, the United States government did not take over the meatpacking industry, but they heavily regulated it so that it was safe for the public to consume. So you also have like other services, for example, water services. Those are generally public companies. They work with cities. Sometimes you might have an entire state, depending on how big the state is, is in control of the water, and then they provide that service at a cost for the people that live in the state. That's a level of government taking over an industry. Otherwise, they will pass legislation saying this is how far a business can go operating freely before they have to meet some sort of regulation or meet some sort of legal standard, and making sure that their products are safe and that are appropriate for the public to consume. And that's what we mean by that. But if it's shoes, if it's your phone, it doesn't matter. They're not going to have much regulations in that field. But if it's something that everyone uses, there will be regulations about that. And that's where we're going to stop today.